Broadcast for shooters, hunters, and gun enthusiasts. This is the Firearms Radio Network. The bandwidth for this episode of the AR-15 podcast is sponsored by Patriot Patch Company. PatriotPatch.co.
Welcome to the AR-15 podcast. This is the podcast about your favorite black rifle. This show is for you. Whether you're building your first AR or you've been building ARs for years, there is something we can all do to take our black rifle to the next level.
You make this show possible by clicking through our Brownells and Amazon affiliate links. The next time you order online, go to AR15podcast.com and click through our Brownells and Amazon affiliate links. It doesn't cost you anything extra, and a small portion of your sale goes to supporting pro-gun radio like the AR-15 podcast.
Welcome to episode number 161 of the AR-15 podcast. Today we're going to be talking politics and legislation affecting the modern sporting rifle. There's been ups and downs. There's definitely some new attacks in the works here, so we're going to discuss kind of the history of legislation, what that did to the industry, and get into kind of what the current concerns are affecting the AR-15 and similar modern sporting rifles today. It's just me, JW, along with JD. Reed is deep into tax season. He's got some things going on, so we're going to take it over this week. What's new, JD?
Not much. Just getting some tools and stuff organized. Didn't get a chance to go out shooting this weekend, but yeah, it's kind of the calm before the storm, before all the kids start spring sports and everything like that. Yeah, I was just at an indoor range with my wife. She was definitely showing me up. We were doing one of those dot torture drills. You just print it out on a single page, and it's like depending on what you do, it's like a box of ammo basically to run through it. And she was smoking me. She takes her time. I mean, I was trying to push the clock a little bit, but she takes her time and she really just stacks rounds. So I've been pretty impressed with her lately. Cool. Does she? I'm trying to get my wife into shooting. We've gone out a couple times, and she tends to like the rifles. But how long did it take for your wife? Did she just grab onto it real quick, or did it take some time?
It's been a while. When we first started, handguns were tough. She felt like they were kind of easier to mess up with, like, oh my gosh, I'm going to point it at somebody else. She felt a little bit more comfortable behind a rifle. But I think it's just familiarization time. Used to be, here's the Silence 22, have a good time. That was about all she was comfortable with. And then it was like, try the M9, big heavy 9mm. It's not going to give you a lot of recoil. And now her favorite gun's the Glock 19. So, yep, she does great with that.
Yeah, the wife tends to like it because I'm like, let's get a babysitter and go shooting. So she gets a date out of it. So I guess it's a win-win for both of us.
Exactly. Hey, Jake just emailed us something that we got to tell people about. What was that?
At the NRA show coming up in May, we're going to have a listener meetup. It is going to be at the Cardinal Hall of Fame Cafe on Saturday, May 21st at 7 p.m. And if they can say ambidextrous, Jake will buy you a drink. Those are his words in the email. So there's your thing. Listener meetup and a free drink on Jake if you can say ambidextrous. I've been practicing it to not screw it up all afternoon, but we look forward to seeing you guys out there. I don't know if any of us are going. Are you planning on going out to the NRA show?
I haven't made any plans to do it just yet. I'll have to look at the calendar, though. I know there's a machine gun shoot coming up here in PA in a few months. Definitely want to make it out to that.
And I think we're going to have a booth. Like the Firearms Radio Network is going to have a booth out there, right, with Jake?
Mm-hmm. Yeah.
So if that's close, you can check that out. And then I'm not going to make it across the country for the NRA show. I'll just stick to SHOT Show out here in Las Vegas. But yeah, cool listener meetup. If you get a chance to meet some of the hosts, some of the guys that are doing the shows on the Firearms Radio Network and a free drink from Jake. We don't even get that. So
the other thing JD was mentioning, we don't really have the details available right now, but there's some serious things in the works towards doing some listener giveaway builds, as far as partnering up with some sponsors that are going to provide us with some build parts. We'll put it together, tell you about the process again, and give that away to a lucky listener. So definitely stay tuned for that. We'll figure out how that all is going to work, and we'll keep you up to date on how the build goes.
Absolutely. So now getting into the main topic, it was something I was thinking about this week. We were just discussing being relatively a new shooter for me, because I haven't been a sports shooter during an assault weapons ban. And JW, you were telling me the same thing. Sometimes when I hear about the political challenges that the AR is facing in the future, I get a little uneasy. Sometimes I, buy lowers in bulk.
If you follow JD on Instagram or anything like that, you'll see he's amassing a collection.
Yeah, so I don't want to feel that unrest with it, but you hear the assault weapons ban, you hear people say things, talk about the barrel shroud that goes over the shoulder, stuff like that. So it makes you think, okay, so what's the future of the AR going to look like in a world where we have political changes? It seems like every 2 years, and then we either have that Congress being reelected in the House or Senate seats up, or we're in a full-blown presidential election like we are this year. So I was wondering about some of the political challenges that the AR has faced since being introduced into the civilian market back in 1963. And really, after I went through and researched it all, I kind of feel a little bit better, a little bit more at peace, knowing that our favorite black rifle has survived several assaults on it. In fact, it's survived every assault on it, because today it's still here and it's one of the most popular rifles in America. So JW, the first piece of legislation, or the first buzz I could find, was the Gun Control Act of 1968. It was kind of spurred by some political assassinations of President Kennedy and other assassinations that had taken place, where guns were being sold through catalogs. Like, you just buy a catalog, they ship it to your house. So the Gun Control Act of 1968 established the FFL system, where there was actually federally licensed dealers that would sell firearms, and they were registered with the United States government. They also required each firearm to have a serial number, a unique serial number, so they could identify the firearm, because some of them would come out with no serial numbers. I read a story of where 100 rifles each had the same serial number. So for me, the government may have other ideas, but for me, if I have a rifle that has the same serial number, it makes it hard if I want to do a tax stamp on one of them and knowing which one, or having to prove, or if it gets stolen, insurance purposes, trying to say, hey, this is the serial number on it, but it turns out that I've got 4 others that have the same serial number, or somebody else has got the same serial number. So somebody
else commits a crime with something that shares the number, and all of a sudden something in your collection is wrapped up in all that.
Absolutely. So I see the meaning behind those things in the Gun Control Act of 1968. And so that was the first real, I don't even know if I'd call it a challenge, JW, that the AR faced. What do you think?
Well, I mean, it meant that you couldn't just call up whoever, Sears and Roebuck, and have one delivered straight to your house. So, I mean, it's a limitation on rights. It's creating some sort of system. It's saying, okay, here's our pie of Second Amendment rights. We'll cut a little slice. We'll give it to you. We'll compromise. And so there's definitely less pie there, but it's still enough to have a good time. We'll see as the years go on, we kind of cut more and more and more slices, and are asked to compromise again and again. But I'd say looking back at 68 and kind of the way things went beforehand, I just can't imagine people today being okay with reverting things to that sort of a system. Having FFLs that are doing background checks now, that are facilitating transfers between people across state lines. It's all commonplace now, and we're used to dealing with that. So I can't see kind of reverting back to anything prior to that.
I would take a massive amount of, political power to even try to pull that off. But I think you're right. I think we've just kind of accepted that. It's kind of our way of life now. And then moving on in 1986, I think it's the Firearms Owners Protection Act.
Mm-hmm.
Was the name of it?
Yeah. So this seemed to kind of come out of the ATF going after people more than the public was comfortable with. So they, rather than going after FFLs that were doing illegal transfers or selling guns to criminals, there were a lot of ATF stings where they would take someone who was a lawful citizen, had no crimes they had ever committed. They would go after them and say, hey, would you like to buy this special firearm here? Would you like to transfer this one across state lines, do this or that? They try to entrap people into performing illegal behaviors only at the behest of the agent themselves. It was getting out of control, and Congress stepped in and said, hey, the ATF needs to go after the bigger scale crime here, the organized, the actual bad guys, rather than trying to turn lawful citizens into lawbreakers. So it's named well. It's Firearm Owners Protection Act. In the process of it moving its way through Congress, there were a couple barbs that got stuck onto it, though. So the biggest one, obviously, is all things related to the NFA, the banning of new machine gun creation and registration, so that anything pre-86, that's all there is. It all went onto a registry, and we really can't manufacture any new machine guns now as just a regular person. We can still transfer them, we can own them, but there's only so many out there, so they got real expensive
really quick.
Yep.
That's the reason that piece of legislation in there is the sole reason I don't have a Ronald Reagan tattoo on my arm or anything like that. So it's my one beef with President Reagan. A couple other things I found.
People call it the Hughes Amendment, and so Hughes was the lawmaker that kind of right at the last second decided, hey, you know what? While we're passing this great thing for gun owners, how about you just compromise just a little bit and let's ban machine guns, the creation of new machine guns.
Our pie just got a little bit smaller again.
Just a little smaller.
And this is why I can't have a legitimate MP5 and without spending my kids' college
$30,000. Yes.
Two of the kids don't need to go to college. I mean, I can explain that to them.
Yeah.
One of these actually helped me was the registry prohibition.
Mm-hmm.
My wife and I are foster parents, and Department of Family Services is a government agency, and they wanted serial numbers and a list of our guns to keep a record of. And so we referenced this. Now I don't know how far legally everything would have gone if they wanted to push it, but we referenced that. It states pretty specifically that a government agency cannot make a registry, and I argued that would be a government agency having a registry of my firearms.
Wow.
I can show you they're safely stored. I can show you where they're at. I have no problem with that. But I'm not going to give you a serial number list of all my weapons. That's a pain in the butt. And frankly, I don't think they needed them. So it went back and forth for a little bit until somebody realized I knew what I was talking about, and then this little piece of legislation saved me a little bit of a pain in the butt. So now they don't even ask anymore, and we've been licensed for 10 years. So they come back, and each time we get a new licensing worker, they are given the heads up that we will be the family that's not submitting serial numbers and stuff like that. So this piece of legislation, helped us 25 years later.
But it's still a regular part of their course of doing business, and they're still asking for it of everybody else. And if you don't know to push back, they got plenty of people submitting lists.
The gun community here is pretty boisterous when stuff like that comes up. So when it got out, it made a little bit of news. So other foster parents are doing the same thing. So it actually changed policy for the department that they now know it's part of their training now, because you can't have that list. So
look at you. Good work.
Yeah. I'm pretty sure I paid for it in other ways that they punished us, but
a couple of the other benefits to FOPA were the safe passage provision. It lets you travel between states. Say I'm going to New Hampshire with my SBRs and silencers, and I have to drive through a couple less than friendly states from Pennsylvania here.
That's an understatement.
Yes, less than friendly. That's allowed by FOPA, and so that says if you go through a state that has more stringent rules, as long as your beginning and ending locations are friendly to what you have, you can go ahead and do that. You can't just hang out in New York and go to a shooting range, but you could drive through. You could maybe even spend the night, and it allows that. So it's kind of a federal permission to forego what the states have restricted.
And not all, just a disclaimer, not all law enforcement agencies are up on that and understand that. So be sure you're kind and polite if you are pulled over or confronted, and know that at the end of the day, no matter how far inconvenienced you are, the law is on your side. In that, is I deal with going through California to go back up to the Pacific Northwest. I've had some conversations with CHP and stuff like that. Some of them very well informed, some of them not, and you just let them do whatever they got to do until somebody tells them it's okay. So
right, and it's not going to change local carry laws. It's not like you can just have a hot SBR locked and loaded in your passenger seat rolling through DC. That's definitely not condoned, but keeping it locked up in the back, good to go.
Mm-hmm. And also clarification of prohibited persons, kind of the form we go through. It just added a little bit more to that and defined that a little bit on that Act of 1986. Moving on to
that's a really important one, because it's who we're allowed to take away constitutional rights from. So it's not something that's done lightly. Hopefully, you've seen things recently where they say, okay, if people are on some federal list, which has people secretly added to it, and no one knows if you're on the list or not on the list, we're going to prohibit their constitutional rights as well. Well, that's a little sticky, but this is kind of where all those forms on the front of your all the questions on the front of your 4473 form came from, as far as, are you a felon? Have you been adjudicated mentally incompetent? Things like that. So that's where it came from, FOPA.
Secret lists. Try having a name James Douglas Smith. Have already red flagged at the airport all the time.
I bet.
Moving on to the assault weapons ban of 1994.
Ooh, that's a big one.
This was and this is one of the ones learning on it where I learned about the political damage that this actually did by pushing this through. President Clinton was in office when this came through, and it pretty much went after the characteristics of the AR, whatever, from pistol grip to the stock. I mean, things that, a pistol grip doesn't make a gun more deadly, neither does a stock, a bayonet mount. I mean, the last time I've had to fashion a bayonet on my rifle, it's probably been since Vietnam, and I wasn't even there. Flash suppressors.
My argument always has been, okay, so say these features do make it more deadly. So that's the point of the Second Amendment, is to protect your right to have a deadly weapon. It's not to protect your right to have something that you can shoot at birds. It's not to protect your right to something you can take a deer with. It's to protect your right to have a deadly weapon. And so if these features make it more deadly, who cares? That it should still be protected.
Absolutely agree. I mean, it was,
but you get the crazy rhetoric that comes out about these scary assault features and how they're making the guns that much more deadly. It's just so tough to hear as someone who actually knows what they are talking about, hearing it from someone who doesn't know what they're talking about, and they're the ones that are making the rules.
Yeah.
So what was it that had kicked this all off in 94? Like, was there there's probably a school shooting, right?
I don't think it was a school shooting. I think it was led up to, I know, was it? It was, I believe the attempt on President Reagan's life was one of the things that played into it. He actually wrote a letter in support of the assault weapons ban. I'm looking real quick here to see if I can pull up what was the exact, by Congress. I don't know if there was really there were
a couple different shootings that had taken place over the years, but it wasn't like one or two just set it off and immediately they went down this path.
Yeah, it was a couple. Now that I remember, it was the 101 California street shooting in July of '93. The shooter killed 8 people and wounded 6. He used a Tech 9. Then there was a AK-47 that was used in Stockton, where 34 kids and a teacher were shot and 5 children lost their lives in that. So that was the school shooting that tipped it off. And it was
kind of the same story that we're hearing about these few and far between incidents that make the news when people do lose their lives throughout the year, just to two person attacks, just with regular old firearms. And so it's kind of the mass shooting newsworthy event that pops up, and they say, hey, let's go after this particular type of firearm.
And so the bill's author was, no surprise, Dianne Feinstein. And they pushed forward. Presidents Ford, Carter, and Ronald Reagan actually wrote the U.S. House of Representatives in supporting the ban. And this is where they said semi-automatic assault guns. So at least they credit a little bit. They got the semi-automatic in there, because now all we hear is assault rifles or weapons of war or those things. But here's something interesting. A USA Today poll back then said 77% of Americans supported a ban on the manufacture, sale, and possession of such weapons. That was back in 1993 and 94 when they were trying to get that passed. And that was I don't remember much about it during that era. I know that ARs were very expensive. I remember a neighbor that had one, and he treated it, basically cleaned it every night and he would only take it out shooting, and he was a big hunter and everything, but that one wouldn't really get any wear on it because he said, I remember him telling me it was rare. And so that was during the assault weapons ban phase there. There's they just basically the detachable magazines, going after the what do they call it? The large capacity or high capacity when, the standard capacity is 30 rounds. And as we talked earlier, just the strange characteristics that you would, talk about on a rifle that really don't. I mean, a stock doesn't really, it fits comfort and different things like that, and we know in sizing and stuff, but it doesn't really add anything to the fact that when you pull the trigger and the round's ejected, that round's still just as deadly as it was if there was a different stock on it, or if it was a AR pistol, or it didn't have a bayonet mount. It really seems like when these come in, instead of being driven by facts, a lot of the times it's driven by hysteria, don't you think?
Oh, for sure. Something looks scary, then it's something to be challenged and to be put on a registry and to be restricted. Like I said earlier, the whole premise of it is what I find issue with, and making the argument that, a telescoping stock doesn't make it more lethal. I don't think that's where we need to be. I think these are lethal weapons, and adding features to them that has nothing to do with it.
And I know Reed's against this because he's totally pro grenade launcher mount. I learned that at SHOT Show. So any large capacity mag that's over 10 rounds was banned. And so it went through that, that phase where, just like in 86, where they fully automatic weapons, no longer to make new ones, that, that piece of the pie that JW talked about, it got a whole lot smaller.
Mm-hmm.
Because what was there was there. And, ARs couldn't. I don't know if anybody, do you recall if anybody got around it and did a different design to get around this assault weapons ban?
No, and this is what we were talking before. I got into shooting right after it sunsetted, and so I really didn't have to deal with it. I'm sure Reed lived through it and suffered through it. We're definitely going to have to ask him about that next week, just to provide some feedback about what life was like under the ban. Companies went out of business. New companies just didn't start. You see the explosion of MSR-based companies, new products that happened in the late 2000s. It's because they were free to do business, and they were completely restricted from doing so during this ban.
And so I just saw something interesting here during this assault weapons ban in the 90s to the early 2000s. It was never directly challenged under the Second Amendment. Cases later on, like Columbia versus Heller, might have shed some interesting light of whether that assault weapons ban was constitutional or not back in the 90s. Another deal is that they were struggling for votes to pass this, and they had to put in a clause that basically saved the AR, and that was the sunset clause, that it would expire on September 13th, 2004. They had a hard time getting votes, and that's how they got it in, and it had a sunset provision. They really wanted the ban to continue, but of course, there was a different political change in that time in 2003, 2004. President Bush was in office, so there really wasn't the push to be able to get it. And in fact, President Clinton said that the assault weapons ban cost them the Congress in voting over, I believe, the next 6 years when he was in office for the rest of his first term and his second term. It cost him the majority in Congress. So it's one of those.
I think you're going to see similar things. You have in places like Colorado where they have taken control of Second Amendment sort of rights. They've really restricted things, and people got voted out. There's been huge backlash when these pieces of legislation make their way through, and I think people look back on what happened after the enactment of the assault weapons ban, and it should cause them some pause when they're starting to push these new proposals.
I mean, it's because the history of this isn't that long ago, and pushing them through cost a lot of people careers in the industry that they chose in politics. And since 2004, the AR market has exploded. It was nothing like it was in '93. It's probably 10 times that. Would you think, JW? I mean, all the companies and everybody who's involved in making or producing or accessories of ARs. I mean, it's massive compared to probably what it was in 1993.
Yeah, I mean, just looking at the number of guys that are coming out of wars where that's what they were carrying, and that's what they're buying when they come back home. I just don't think it can even compare. The industry's just absolutely exploded since then. And so we have had some late, more recent pushes for assault weapons bans. The 2013 one, this was within hours after Sandy Hook. There were what do they call them? The poll things on the White House website. People were calling for the ban of assault weapons. Feinstein went ahead and introduced a proposed bill, clamping it down even tighter than the 94 ban. That was kind of a two-feature sort of ban, kind of like what California has. You have semi-auto rifles, you've got removable magazines, and then you've got one or two features that put it on the list. This latest one was just one feature. They named 150 guns specifically that you just can't sell or buy, and then of course all magazines that were greater than 10 rounds. It kind of wound its way through Congress a little bit. The NRA. This is when LaPierre came out and really pushed the only thing that stops a bad guy with a gun is a good guy with a gun. It's all the fallout after Sandy Hook, where someone was able to just take over that building, and they went after the guns rather than school security or the other ways that we can protect soft targets. So they went after assault weapons again. Then it was voted on in the Senate. It failed 40-60, and there's some interesting polls that have come out as far as which demographics supported or were against that. I mean, tensions were high after that incident, and you had rhetoric from the president saying he was going to use any power he could get his hands on to push some sort of rule through. People got nervous, and I think a lot of guns got sold.
An insane amount. I don't think that corrected itself for probably 8 or 9 months post the that rush on firearms. I mean, everything. I remember going to websites and seeing, buying magazines at $12 a pop, and then going back to the same said website, and it was $89 a pop. I mean, there's a lot of price gouging. There's a lot of panic buying. I mean,
things were no longer less expensive than soil.
The 22. I mean, try to find a box of 22 around. A couple months after that, it was non-existent. People were scheduling setting alarms to go meet the delivery truck at Walmart to see what they had on the on the shipment. I mean, it was crazy. And I've got to personally wonder if it was because of what had happened, the tragedy that had happened when somebody made a serious, horrible choice, or was it the rhetoric that followed that caused all that? I mean, it's just that it goes back to that hysteria again. It's like in a time when we need peace and to figure out what happened and to comfort those that are going through, unspeakable things. Exactly. It just seems like we get all fired up and politics takes over and rhetoric, and people forget that it's, and
it's always proposed regulations that would have nothing to do with preventing what just happened.
It's just, it's a sad cycle that we're seeing kind of go over and over again. Since the beginning, when the first assault weapons ban was born out of another shooting that took place by just one individual who decided to make bad choices. I mean, that's the meme that goes around, or the saying that goes around. There's roughly 325 million guns or something in the United States. One of them or two of them was what was used. The rest of them are with law-abiding citizens that, love to sport shoot, want to defend their family, and cherish their Second Amendment right to be able to own that firearm. Yep. So that one failed in it was 2013. That one failed 40-60 in the Senate. I believe that was a split. A Senate and the House were split by the two parties, so I don't imagine it would have gone through. Then the latest attempt was after what happened in San Bernardino, and which in California that currently has an assault weapons ban. They have several characteristics and things that you have to, registry or approve guns and things. And so when that happened, they went again. They tried to push for an assault weapons ban, and it kind of, I believe, backfired on them a little bit. Don't you think, JW?
Yeah, it seemed like there was a swell of support back in 13-14 after these first couple highly publicized incidents. There was a lot of support that was kind of rising for those sorts of bans, limitations. Lately, though, it seems like things have turned the other direction. They tried to, I think it was right in the middle of December. I mean, it was just recently when this one came back up again. A lot of support in Congress, but among the polling that has been done, it seems like people have really switched sides on this issue. They've seen, hey, maybe going after these guns isn't what needs to happen. Maybe it's going after the people that are committing these crimes. Hey, there's all these laws that are already on the books that, yeah, you're not supposed to be buying guns for your boyfriend. You can't just go in, buy guns, and give them to a felon who goes on to commit crimes. Maybe we should go after those people and shut that down rather than limiting certain types of firearms. So I think there's some sensibility that has entered the public just because of all the discussion. People have realized, wait a second, maybe it's just rhetoric, maybe it's people using fear tactics rather than actually knowing what they're talking about. And so the dust is kind of settled. People have realized that going after certain types of firearms, maybe that's not really going to have an effect on crime.
And even how to purchase, banning, a lot of states taking the banning private sales, or the private sales have to go through now an FFL dealer to run a background check or things like that. I don't know about you, JW, but I've made several purchases locally where I'm able to do a private transfer here in Nevada legally. And I got to tell you, we're pretty good as a gun community at policing our own. I mean, we show CCWs, we show licenses, we sign bills of sale with information on it, so we're both covered. And it's kind of like that. I mean, the gun community tends to really police itself when it comes to those things. So a lot of the gun show loophole and all that stuff that gets come up, bad people are still going to find a way to get a tool into their hands to do bad things. Regular law-abiding citizens are going to follow the law, and they're going to go out of their way probably to keep following the law. So the bans and just that hysteria that follows it, it's never a calm discussion. It's always, we have to have this done, or people are going to die, or the propaganda that's left and right. If we just had to talk about it and showed that, hey, there are a lot of laws on the books. The pie, it grew back after the 2004 sunset, but that pie is a cherished right. And when you have something like that you want to take care of, you make sure you follow the rules with it. And I think 99.9% of gun owners are that way, don't you think?
Absolutely. Yeah. I mean, there's a realization that we're dealing in lethal weapons. And it's not like, I mean, for me to do this to make money, to sell a part of my collection to make money, I have to be an FFL, and I'm not an FFL. So I'm not in it for the money there, and I'm not in it to push the rise of crime. So it's in my best interest to do things the right way, to make sure that I'm not selling things to scumbags. And I agree with you. I mean, we're doing all the right things to make sure these aren't getting in the wrong hands. And there's a lot of crime that goes unpunished, or things that get pleaded down, or people say, okay, we'll go after the drug crime that he committed rather than the firearms crime. There's no reason. If people realize that, hey, if you get thrown in jail for drug crime, you're also gonna have that firearm crime tacked onto it as well, to extend your sentence, to make it that much worse of a crime, then maybe they're going to stop carrying guns with them, because they know that the penalties will be that much harsher. We're just not doing that.
Yeah. And so that kind of leads into something that we put down here under future challenges. We'll get to in just a second. There are states with current assault weapons ban, in California, Connecticut, DC, Hawaii, Maryland, Massachusetts, New Jersey, New York. These are the not so free states, as I say.
Mm-hmm.
So,
and there's been challenges. I mean, lately, Maryland, the U.S. Court of Appeals took on Maryland's assault weapons ban. I'm not completely familiar with that, but it sounds like they found that some of the limitations they're putting on Maryland gun owners are unconstitutional. And post Heller case that does confirm that, yes, we do have a right to have loaded firearms in the home to protect ourselves, that the limitations that Maryland was putting on people are above and beyond what's constitutional. So it'll be interesting to see where this one goes, how high it goes up. I mean, the Supreme Court hasn't taken this on since Heller. If things do get raised to that level, then they could turn back some of the limitations that states have put on certain classes of firearms. States they do have the right to make their own legislation, but if that legislation limits a constitutional right, the feds kind of step in. And so I think that could happen here.
It could happen. It also, the opposite could happen, with the state of the United States Supreme Court. That's why supporting the Second Amendment, the Second Amendment Foundation, the NRA, and those guys that lobby on behalf of our Second Amendment rights is very important. It's a very, very one of the things that adds to the kind of the political scheme right now of everything that's going on is that there is a vacancy at the Supreme Court, and who's going to be nominated to fill it. So that's why it's important to be involved politically with those organizations that support firearms and the AR and the Second Amendment. I found it as we're talking about the assault weapons bans and stuff, and all the hysteria and the people getting in front of the podium and telling us all these things and how these are such bad guns. And then you've got this that you added from the state senator that supported the assault weapons ban there in California. Why don't you tell us about this winner?
Oh, everybody's heard of Leland Yee here. So he was a huge proponent of the California gun control, and it turns out he was trying to sell guns to, was it drug gangs or something like that? Trying to funnel in illegal guns, just kind of on the side, make another couple dollars for the campaign. Just an absolute criminal. Turns out they are kind of dismissing all of those firearms charges, and they're just locking him up on bribery charges, racketeering. And so he's just going to kind of go for a couple of years to a real nice federal prison where all the white collar guys go. And it's like there's another standard for those that are in power.
I'm going to just say, if you or me ever get busted for arms trafficking, we're going to get the book thrown at us. We're not going to get the plush prison cell and everything like that. We're going to be breaking rocks in Siberia or something like that. But it's funny, the hypocrisy that runs through there. One of the cool things that's kind of on the horizon for firearms is something I believe Silencer Co., Silencer Shop, those guys have been pushing basically the education of silencers being used for hunting and other things like that, the Hearing Protection Act. Why don't you tell us a little bit about that, JW?
Yeah, absolutely. The ASA, the American Suppressor Association, has been huge on this. This is the silencer lobbying arm, where guys, like you said, like Silencer Co., Silencer Shop, they have been supporting this cause to deregulate firearm silencers. We could debate silencer versus suppressor terminology, but that's what they're called in the laws. They have a piece of legislation that is working its way through Congress. It's a bill to have silencers be treated the same way as long guns. You do a 4473. It's still a compromise, but it takes them off of NFA. It makes it so you don't have to do the tax stamp. It doesn't cost that extra $200. It'd probably just be a regular transfer. If you've got a guy that does transfers for $20 by you, it'd be $20. And they do a NICS check or some sort of background check, and you'd have it same day, hopefully. This is huge. It'd be awesome. Silencers have been just exploding in popularity. People know and are learning the just the safety aspect of it, making shooting easier and more accessible because it brings the whole tenor of the range down. Neighbors don't get upset. Say somebody's getting out of their car and they're still getting their hearing protection on. They're not causing hearing damage because the levels are that much quieter. Other countries even have they're just not regulated like guns like they are here. This is working its way through. Mike Lee was the sponsor of this bill, and Rand Paul actually just hopped on board as a co-sponsor. So they're both working on this, and Yeah, you go to congress.gov. It's bill. I don't know how to read this stuff. It's S2236, and there you go. I mean, it'd be great, and it actually backdates to October when they introduced it. So if you got silencers out there now that are waiting in ATF jail, you get your $200 back. So
you'll get a tax refund from the ATF. I like it.
Yeah.
I wonder if you get the child credit for that too, if that would be open to that. So that's kind of a look at the
I thought we'd end on a high note there.
Yeah, the political challenge the AR has faced since being introduced in 1963. There's probably some future stuff coming up. You know, the elections and that Supreme Court vacancy. But we asked you guys on Facebook, so we'll share a couple of these. Some of them very entertaining. Travis Wild wrote, I asked, how do you see, with the political climate as it is, how do you see things changing in 6 months, a year, 5 years? So he said for 6 months, nothing with the coming election, nothing drums up political activism by our side by like threatening gun rights, and the anti-gunners know it. In a year, depends on their election results, Democrats will continue their attack on gun rights if they remain. And once again, this is Travis Wild's thoughts on this. And in 5 years, he said, harder to say. There's a lot of people coming to our side, and they feel like us. At the same time, the other side's efforts are only getting stronger and more organized. Then he asked if you think we'll see another attempt at the assault weapons ban in that time. He doesn't think it'll happen, but I think from what we've seen, there'll probably be just ceremonial attempts, probably, just depending on the layout on the political land, wouldn't you think?
Yeah, like this one here in December. I mean, their base is pushing it, making them bring up the legislation, but with the percentages there in Congress, it's just not going to happen.
Yeah. Sean Snyder said, in 6 months, I need to acquire one in this time frame, another AR. In a year, I should have at least 3 more AR style rifles, and then in 5 years, I will buy another safe. So Sean
I like how he interpreted that question.
He's got a good plan. Jason wrote, buy 2 more lowers and form one them before July, before ATF 41F changes. Buy some more mags. I want to stock up on 5.56 before November. He's predicting a rush and maybe some panic buying. And Reed may have a new neighbor if everything goes to hell politically. Move to Texas because they'll probably secede by then. So, so thanks for your guys' feedback over there at Facebook.
Yeah, I recognize Jason there. Thanks for the feedback.
So, if you've got any thoughts, we'd love to talk about this. It's probably something we could mention in shows in the future as we get closer to the elections in November. If you do have any questions or comments on this topic, you can shoot us an email. It's ar15.podcast@gmail.com. That's ar15.podcast@gmail.com. JW, did you have any final thoughts you wanted to share?
I don't think so. I mean, it's a tough world out there politically. I know I don't have the education or the time to continue to push my politicians. That's why I do try and support organizations like the NRA, like the ASA. They're fighting the good fight. And I mean, yeah, you get a lot of spam from them in the mail, but when Congress is saying that the NRA is really powerful, it's because it's true. And they are representing our concerns as citizens that I really hope that the Second Amendment stands firm and it continues to protect our rights.
Nice. I'd like to say that I won't buy another 10-pack of lowers, but I can't commit to that. I may see a good deal and do it, but I think after going through this and reading about the history of what our favorite black rifle has endured, seeing what it's come to now, I'm not sure I'm not sure there's anything to panic buy about. I think you just continue your life and, continue the plans and the things that you want to build. And, we know that 41F's coming in July. So if you want to make your life a little bit easier between now and then, you submit some Form 1s. But other than that, I think you just kind of keep your normal pace buying up. And, I buy enough ammo once a year to supply me for the year to shoot. I kind of predict it out and just make one big purchase at tax time. And so that gets me through and buy a box here and buy a box there. I don't see any panic buying, and I have a lower problem. This is fact. So I'll always buy a lower if I'm getting a good deal and a brand I want. But I'm going to be interesting to watch how politics unfolds and how our black rifle weathers this election of 2016. And I'm sure it'll come out on the other side with an industry that's even stronger and better prepared to face whatever the other side wants to throw at us.
For sure.
So with that being said, questions or comments, ar15.podcast@gmail.com. That's ar15.podcast@gmail.com. You can also send us a recorded voicemail by using the SpeakPipe plugged in on the right-hand side of the AR-15 podcast website. Subscribe and listen to the AR-15 podcast for free on iTunes or Stitcher. Leave us a review there. Over 500 reviews there on iTunes. I checked out, the top podcasts that I consider a gun podcast, and they are nowhere near that. You guys are amazing leaving those reviews, so thank you so much for that. If you are having a problem, there's been a iTunes, iPhone issue with some podcast stuff. Go to the AR-15 podcast Facebook page. That's facebook.com/AR-15 podcast. Pinned there to the top of the page is how to resolve that problem. So if you're streaming through the website or Stitcher or something else, and you normally do iTunes, there is a way to get that fixed. You can share your pics on Instagram at AR15 Podcast. Tag your pictures with the hashtag AR15 Podcast. We check in on Periscope from time to time, and cool things are coming up. That Facebook page again, facebook.com/AR15 Podcast. Make sure you check out the other podcasts on the Firearms Radio Network. And don't forget to use the Brownells affiliate link for all your AR-15 parts needs at ar15podcast.com/parts. And with that, JW, I believe episode 161 is in the books.
That's it. Yeah, I just recommend everybody check out the website. I know Jake's been doing a lot of work over there. It's really kind of a team page now. AR15podcast.com brings you right into the network, so you can see all the other shows available. And I just want to echo that point to check out some of the other shows. There's some great content, so give it a try, and talk to you again next week.
Take care.
This has been a production of the Firearms Radio Network. You can find more information at firearmsradio.tv.